Was it the best London series yet? I believe so. That's 3 London series in the books for Major League Baseball. No London series planned for 2025, but looking ahead to 2026. I believe it's the best one. I've got the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett, in the house to help me recap on a stunning London series. Equally, a look at the Marlins. What are we excited about headed towards the deadline? And what are we headed as we head to the end of the season? What are we also excited about as we get into the depths of summer? Tons to get into. This is Locked On Marlins.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked On Marlins. This is your daily Marlins pod. I'm your host, Peter Pratt. Hit me up, of course, at Miami Marlins _UK. If you're listening to the pod, of course, hit subscribe and leave a review. This is your team every day, and thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. Reminder, there's a YouTube channel. Head on over there. I strongly recommend you to do that. There are 2 studs for your viewing pleasure at this point. You may have seen us on Twitter together over the weekend. The UK GOAT is back. First time. UK GOAT made 0 appearances in May on Locked On Marlins, and we have righted that ship early doors in June. UK GOAT Sean Barrett in the house. How we doing, brother?
Yeah, I was going to say long time no see. That it's been a good 5 weeks at least, maybe even 6. But of course, we did see each other over the weekend, which was fantastic.
No doubt.
Yeah, looking forward to getting into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure, mate. We're going to cover plenty of that. Before we do that, this episode is sponsored by our good friends over at PrizePicks, and it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. And as Sean Barrett has highlighted here, we're recording this on a Monday evening. It is, we're reflecting back on a stunning weekend of baseball in London. Yes, there was baseball in London. And I know this is Locked On Marlins. And I know the Marlins weren't playing. We're going to talk about, actually, could they play in London at some stage in the future, later on in this pod. But, it was some NL East foes. It was teams we're familiar with. It's teams that, frankly, myself and Sean, we wanted, what do we want, a score draw? We were looking for no one to win anything. In the end, we get a split series. But this is where things are interesting for us as British baseball fans or baseball fans based in the UK. I think that's a better way of describing us. Just seeing the London Stadium fully packed out, 2 days on the spin, in June. It's the 3rd series as well, Sean. They've done this. And so for me, in my opinion, and I think there's a few reasons why, and we'll talk about them. But for me, this is, I think, my favorite London series so far. I know you only did the Saturday, so you only have 1 day to go off. But in your opinion, how would you rank them? Equally, what was the best thing about the London series for you this year?
Yeah, I think for me, obviously only going to the one game, I think it can't be my favourite because, I didn't double up, wasn't available to. But I can see from what I saw on Saturday and then from what I can see online on Sunday, especially the game, which was real close, real tight, especially at the end of the game. I can see why people that were there for both days would say that. So I think I would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
As far as my favourite part of it was, besides obviously joining yourself for a few beers at the game, which was fantastic, I think just the enthusiasm that the fans brought. I don't really want to praise them too much because they are our rivals, but the Philly fans really did show out. They absolutely took over the stadium. And just the atmosphere that they brought, obviously, every hit, the Harper home run as well, it was just electric. So to see a real major league product on the field, but also see almost like a playoff atmosphere. Because if that was a game in Philadelphia, sure, they'd be loving it. And, the Philly fans are fanatic, quite literally. But because it's the only game that a lot of people in the UK are going to see as Philly fans live anyway, it just brings that extra buzz to the ballpark. And it's something that, we don't see very often. I mean, I go to I've gone to nigh on nearly every NFL game in London.
Mm.
I've seen 10 or 11 Jags games. I've seen more Jags games than it's basically healthy for a human being to watch. But very rarely, if ever, has the atmosphere got that loud because it's such a diverse crowd. You've got 30 odd teams. It was really interesting to see. While yes, you have fans of every team there, the Philly fans really did seem to sort of outnumber everybody else compared. They were way over 50%.
Yeah, completely agree. That's my biggest takeaway as well from the weekend. I managed to do both games, and have been to every London Series game, including the two from 2019 pre-COVID, the Yankees and Red Sox, Cubs Cards, Phil's Mets. To your point, Sean, the turnout, particularly from the Phillies fan base, that traveled. The Phillies fans traveled amazing, and I have to call it out. Really, so did the Mets. Like when I look at like percentage wise of, okay, are you American? Are you British? Are you something like? It was. I would say it probably was like 60% American was the sense that I got. Maybe 40% British. Like it was weighted. But the Phillies fans in particular were like the standout for me. Their sections, particularly like around the dugout, around that third baseline, were like packed. The atmosphere was pumped. The Mets equally, like the problem was, game one, the game that you saw live, the problem was the Mets like were just not in that game. Like the Phils took control. We'll talk about, there's a funny incident around that, but the Phils did take control. And then it kind of just ticked along. The Mets didn't really have much to get excited about. Apart from the bases juiced in the final inning, obviously, JD Martinez, there is a connection here some way to Locked On Marlins. Somehow, JD Martinez ends up grounding into a double play to end that one. But to your point, the Phillies fans, the Mets fans equally, I think, should be applauded. But like that created the atmosphere, and it didn't feel neutral. I think that's the key difference, and that's what you've highlighted in the NFL, because I've been to a lot of them NFL games too, where you end up with maybe a knowledgeable but neutral fan base. It doesn't have the same buzz. This wasn't neutral. This was pure Phillies and Mets, and then a bit of UK sprinkled in that were just there to have fun. And I thought it created a stunning atmosphere, and it was fully engaged, fully buzzed. Like everyone was like all in, no doubt. And we sat primarily down the first baseline, like within the Mets, Mets fan base. It was heavily Mets where we were, but it was awesome. I would say like the atmosphere was awesome. And I think one of the other things, Sean, is going back to like the Yankees Red Sox series. I think the initial vibes was because of how those games played out in the most spectacular of ways, that those first inning that seemingly went on for 7 hours in that first game. I think a lot of people just like wrote off British, the London series and were like, this isn't real. This isn't reflective of baseball. This will never be real. But I think this series, to me, both the fan base, the atmosphere was very real, and the product on the field was real. Like, I think just for whatever reason, that first game, it was just a freak result, freak situation. Now we've settled into the groove where it's proper baseball with proper fans, 80,000 people there in London, and it's a proper playoff atmosphere, mate. I mean, the London series right now is continuing to get better and better. And, it feels crazy how much they've come along from that first inning of that Yankees-Red Sox game, where it felt like no pitcher could ever, go 3 innings, it seems. I don't know. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think the word freak is probably the right word, actually. That first game was definitely sort of a freak show. I remember being in the stadium and thinking, this isn't a close approximation of baseball, which I've followed baseball for 2 decades. So I have a good understanding of what a game should look like. So I was concerned that was very much a British crowd, in my opinion, those first games. And I just felt like it wasn't like a real representation. Obviously, the offense was fantastic for the fans. There was a lot of excitement, but it just didn't feel like the real deal. This definitely did this weekend.
Yeah.
My main concern is, obviously, we had games planned that were then cancelled because of COVID. There's no games next year because there were supposed to be games in Paris that then got cancelled, and that's been rearranged. So all that excitement, all that buzz for baseball in the UK. Now, there's obviously a reasonably large niche fan base of baseball over here. but the fact that we know most of them by name
Yes.
shows you how niche it is. So having that missing year is just a shame. If we look at the NFL and how that's grown in the UK over a decade or more now of games, and every year there seems to be like this growth or this difference to it. Hopefully, baseball continue to bring games to the UK because obviously we really want them. But I think the growth that the NFL have seen, not just in the UK, because a lot of people do come over from Europe as well. Having that happen for baseball is obviously huge. You know, money talks, and when you can pack a stadium out with 80,000 people, and let's be frank, the ticket pricing over here is significantly higher than it is over in the US.
No doubt.
That can't be avoided. I think part and parcel of that is just the huge cost of the transformation that happens in the stadium. But yeah, my hope is that even with the lost year, some of the buzz from this year carries on when they do come back in 26.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, for those, may not be as close to the situation. Paris was supposed to host 2 games. Unfortunately, they've had an issue with the promoter, I think, was the actual issue. So they've had an issue with someone who's going to promote the game. There's other issues, I believe, linked to the Stade de France. Something's got on there, but nevertheless, those games effectively won't be going ahead, and by all accounts, it won't be transitioned into London. Like London now, at this point, they know what they're doing, and they could probably make it happen, but for whatever reason, it doesn't feel like it will. So effectively, 2025, it seems, won't be any European experience. I did hear some rumors talking about them, like MLB are really focused on Tokyo in 2025, perhaps anyway. So we'll see. 2026 games will return to London. What we don't know at this point is who will be playing. And I think that it's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm going to hit that after the first ad, actually, and talk about that a little bit more detail, start to speculate maybe. But going back to your point, though, Sean, for me, again, this is it for MLB. I'm really interested to see whether this truly becomes a long-term commitment, whether they see this as a viable opportunity for them in London, year after year, where it's just part of the cadence of the sport. And for what I'm seeing, I don't see how it couldn't be. But they have to be. I think what we have seen is they need to get the right teams. They need to get the right teams in to make it the right atmosphere and to keep the success rolling with this one. But I still feel it's super undertapped, really, this market for baseball generally. I think what we're seeing is fans are traveling to London from the States, which is really adding to it. You're sprinkling in some UK-based people. But generally, I still think it's like super niche and there's more that can be done. And I think that's the bit for MLB. I think this is just a toe in the water for them. They're just dipping the toe. How's the market reacting? What are we seeing? And then it'll become, okay, are we going to go all in on London and, commit for 10 plus years again? You know what I mean? It becomes like, it's just announced. London every year in June, it happens. We know it. And everything just builds around that. The momentum builds around it. And I think what it allows you to do, I was speaking to someone that was kind of connected to the Yankees organization during the weekend, and they were talking about how they felt a little bit shortchanged, actually, because the momentum they tried to build was stopped by COVID. They really initiated with like the schools, equipment, all this stuff that starts to lay the foundations of baseball in kids. And then because of COVID, that stops. And so they felt a little bit shortchanged maybe in like some of their investments they made. They maybe weren't able to realize that. And so, looking ahead, it wouldn't shock me if the Yankees are one of the next to return. We've seen the Mets travel well, the Phillies travel well, but the Yankees, I think, travel well as well. So I'm with you, Sean, that it feels like a success. Like if there was any improvement that you would make to the London series, like from a fan experience perspective, is there anything you could call out based on your experiences the past couple of years?
I think, to be fair, they do a very good job. I think if I look at the early days of the NFL, I'd say that the things around the game that they do, so the event at Trafalgar Square is usually very, very good. And the engagement that they bring to, as you said, the youth game is so key to British baseball as far as playing. Actually, I have a little bit of knowledge with that, playing myself. But the BBF, so the British Baseball Federation, this year have made a very concerted effort to try and grow and put funding into the youth game and the women's game, actually, to be fair to them. That really is key to growing the sport over here.
Yeah.
When the NFL first started in decades ago, there was probably more American football sort of interest in playing than baseball has now.
Mm-hmm.
So the game is growing, and but that's mostly off the back of people over here having MLB and the American money coming over. Because what I found is the British game is so grassroots.
Yeah.
That just a tiny bit of money goes a very long way.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the one thing I'd like to see. Not that they're not doing it, but I'd like to see that continue because I think growing the sport over here, bringing the games is fantastic. Obviously, we have access to it on the telly, which is huge. But just seeing that continue, because the game will grow exponentially if the money's there growing the game at the youth level, because that ultimately is the future of the game here.
Exactly. Great shout. I did see that there was, I think it was MLB UK, I want to say, or BS UK, one of the organizations. I should have fact checked myself on that before in advance and thought about who it was. But even so, they put on something. I believe it was at Farnham Park for all the kids. There was a big, massive event. I think the Thursday, the Friday, and so yeah. To your point, Sean, like these are the things that will create the future, and in some ways, it ties to the Marlins too, right? Where from a Marlins perspective, it's about how do you get that new young wave to become Marlins fans. Really, from a UK perspective, it's how do you get that new young wave to become familiar with baseball and equally see fun and excitement in the game, playing it firstly, but equally, as soon as you start to play something, naturally you then are drawn to, well, what does elite look like? And then you then get your eyeballs on Major League Baseball and the Marlins clearly at that point. So, we'll wait and see. I want to ask you straight after the ads about who we think, could come to the UK in 2026 and beyond, and whether the Marlins could ever fit the brief. Before we do that, time to let you know, well, firstly, about our good friends over at iBorder. Yes, sir. And we've got to get the graphics package rolling for these boys too. Yes, we have. An iBorder, it's a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies to toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average iBorder user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much, but with iBorder, just add your offers in the app, upload your receipt, and you get real cash that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. So join over 50 million users and earn cash back every time you shop from over 2,700 brands and retailers, including all your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, iBorder is offering our listeners $5 just for trying iBorder by using the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Yes, you heard that correctly. You get $5 just for trying the app. Trying the app, $5. What is not to like about that? Make sure you use the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free iBorder app to start earning cash back. Reminder on that code, it is LOCKEDONMLB. iBorder is IBOTTA. So iBorder in the Google Play or App Store with the code LOCKEDONMLB. This episode is also brought to you by our good friends over at PrizePicks. Yes, sir. And PrizePicks is the #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members. It is the most fun and exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. Just pick more or less than on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win over 100 times your cash. With PrizePicks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stats, projections, and you're locked in. Baseball season is officially underway, and there's no better way to cash in on the action than PrizePicks. Add your favorite players from the diamond to your PrizePicks lineups all season long, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs. take your pick of more or less than and add them to your PrizePicks lineup today. So all you have to do is download the app, and the app is PrizePicks, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. $100? Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Repeat, and it is pick more, pick less, PrizePicks. It is that easy. All right, guys, back here with me, Peter Pratt, and the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett. We are talking, we're talking more about the London Series. There was, 2 days of action down there. But we're looking ahead, Sean, because 2026 will come around quick. From what I've seen, there's a lot of East Coast bias, I would say, with the teams that have been selected to come over. Equally, there's some big rivalries. There's some big markets. So there's a pattern emerging, I would say, Sean. Looking ahead to 26, assuming nothing happens in 25, where do you think they go with the next matchup here?
Yeah, you stole a few more points, Elsie. We've had both East divisions, and we've had 4 big teams from those, 4 big markets from those 2 divisions.
Mm-hmm.
Then at the NL Central, again, 2 of the high-profile teams, Cubs and Cardinals. We haven't had the AL Central yet, so that might be the next option. I think the West Coast teams are probably a no because they tend to send them the other way around the globe because of time difference. I think that makes sense. Over here, it's reasonably difficult to follow the game with the time zones. Central is a little bit more survivable, but the West Coast is just horrific. I don't know how the West Coast guys over here do it because it's crazy. The problem I have with the AL Central is the teams aren't particularly that interesting, are they? I mean, Royals Twins, is that going to get somebody that's not into baseball? Probably not.
I don't think so.
It depends on how they want to go. I mean, when the NFL first came over here, that's what they did. In-division rivals, big teams.
Yeah.
And then they started to transition to bringing in, to steal one of your words, dog shit teams as the home team, having them play a good team.
Yeah.
To try, because there were teams in the NFL, like the Jags, who we've seen a lot of, who at the time were really bad and didn't draw well. And it was an opportunity for them to come over here and actually make more money than they would at a home game. Does this not sound perfect for the Marlins to come over, do a 2-game series against probably an in-division rival, of which we've got would they want to bring the Phillies again? Yeah, I mean, it looked good, didn't it?
Yeah, why not?
And especially with that year gap, I think realistically they wouldn't want to double up so quickly. But we've seen what the Phillies can do as far as bringing in a crowd. The Marlins would be all over that shortly. Rather than having 6,000 people in the stadium, you've got 12 times the amount of people in the stadium. That's a lot of money for Bruce. And we know that that's an important incentive for this man. So I think it depends on how they go. I think if they want to continue to grow baseball with that year off, I think they should go big market. I said we shouldn't go west, but Dodgers, Padres, that would certainly whet the appetite. There's a lot of ways to go, and it just depends on what kind of sort of scenario they want to go with. Are they trying to create fans, or are they trying to in the Marlins coming here like the Jags would? Obviously, as Marlins fans, that would excite us massively. But I think there are very good connections between the Jags and the Marlins as far as what they would get out of it. So I think that could be an interesting wrinkle that if they are bringing baseball here for the next couple of years, or if they're going to bring 2 series here, that's where I think the Marlins situation might happen. If you're going to bring 2 series over, you bring the big high-profile teams to try and make it look exciting, and then you factor in the Marlins playing a mid-tier team, knowing that they're actually going to make some money off the back of it.
Sean Barrett, it makes a ton of sense. I'm completely with you on I think that is the role that the Marlins can play. I think basically what we have to say is the East Coast makes a ton of sense for travel time and fan bases to obviously head over to support. That's obviously a fundamental aspect of these London series being successful. So East Coast is going to be, I think, where they go. West Coast is just too far. I think they're going to other international locations. And so I think it then comes down to, I think for 2026, the view is big market East Coast again. In my opinion, it wouldn't stun me if you get a Yankees and Mets, frankly. That could be an interesting one. A lot of people that I was speaking to during the weekend were saying Yankees, Blue Jays sounded interesting. I know for whatever reason, the Blue Jays have got a massive following in the UK. So that could be a really interesting one. I think the Yankees want to come back and maybe, continue what they'd started. So I think that's interesting. But, anyone down on that East Coast, I think could be interesting. The problem is for the Marlins, they would see the value, but I don't think Major League Baseball at this point would want to lead with a Marlins series if it's only one series. You could look at a rivalry, and I think you could absolutely see in the future if they went multi-series where you end up with Marlins Braves, for example. Marlins Rays, maybe. I mean, that's really testing it because, to your point, if the Marlins are the home team and they're drawing 80,000 over twice in a row, 160,000 people, that's what they draw in a month at this point. You can see there being viable, and you can see what it meant for the Jags in the UK too. The Jags are probably up there as a top 3 follow team in the UK because they've committed to the market, and that's what you get. If you get the same teams coming over and over, and you're trying to work out, well, who am I going to follow? I'm new to the NFL. I'm a UK-based fan. I'm new to the NFL. I don't know who to follow because I've got no connections. But if every year the Jags are coming, then you'll go, well, okay, they're London's team. So you become a Jags fan. There's no reason the Marlins couldn't do something like that. And they'd see the opportunity for something like this. But I think you've nailed it, though. I don't think the Marlins market is clearly anywhere near big enough for it to be, the only series. Marlins, Mets, you'd probably still get a ton of Mets fans, and so that'd probably work okay. But I think they're looking for 2 super big teams in its current format. And I think beyond 26, maybe they start to consider, do you multi-series it? Do you do a week at the start of June and another weekend, maybe mid-June, and you give a little break in between? I don't know. You could make it work. So you'd have to kind of keep, you see more benefit. You set the stadium up right, and you kind of come back twice in the space of 2 weeks. It makes sense. You can make it happen. Will the fan base be there? I don't know. But really interesting one. Yankees, Blue Jays, to me, feels like a bit of a favorite. I could absolutely see the Yankees and Mets, too. I feel like that would be an interesting one. I'd love, personally, Marlins, Braves. I was joking, saying, just imagine, imagine, I guess, announced for 26, and the Marlins' first roster move is to sign Jose Urena to a minor league contract with et cetera, et cetera. And Urena ends up on the Marlins again. That would be absolutely wild. Let's hit the final ad. I want to look ahead because we've talked limited amounts of Marlins. We've talked a lot about London Series. Rightly so, because that's exactly what me and Sean have had our eyeballs on. But I want to ask Sean specifically about what he's got his eyeballs on in the next couple of weeks. Before we do that, it's time to let you know about our good friends over at FanDuel. Yes, sir. And summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. And a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, guys, final segment here with me, Peter Pratt, and the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett. And Sean, looking ahead, listen, it's 10th of June. The Marlins season is not going the way we expected. However, we've got a couple of milestones coming up. The deadline, back end of July. 7 weeks worth of play. What have you got your eyes on headed into the deadline for the Marlins specifically?
Yeah, I mean, the deadline is freaking fast coming, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
Yeah, the season's cooked. We know that. There's no point even thinking about that. So it is a case of what happens now with the team as far as, there are going to be some moving parts. We're going to see a lot of guys moving, but unfortunately, it's a case of limited returns, unfortunately. I don't see there being a lot unless Luzardo's moved. I don't see Bell getting a big return. We saw what the team got in return for Arias, so it's going to be interesting. I think obviously that creates opportunity. We're seeing a couple of guys, Conine in particular, starting to get a bit hot. I mean, he's just about to turn 27. He might have turned 27 before he comes up. So I think it is a case of if not now, when. But yeah, I mean, Mish kind of set it all out and was as negative as I usually am. Talking about the idea that teams can only be in the lottery twice in a row.
Yeah.
And that's where the Marlins are, aren't they? They're going to be in the lottery for the next 2 years. So we're going to see everything of any value that is going to be expiring, disappearing. Mish also spoke about the idea that there are going to be no extensions. And quite frankly, you look across the roster and you've got to be honest. In a rebuild, who there is there to be extended? Now, yes, you could look at Erie, but we need to see a return from Tommy John surgery.
Yep.
There are some high-level minor league pitching guys that some teams would think about extending, but that doesn't fit the Marlins' MO.
No.
So unfortunately for me, I'm looking at the rest of the season and saying it's a case of you get what you can get from the guys that you're going to trade. Scott, I think, will get probably the highest return for the Marlins. So that will be interesting.
Yeah, well,
I don't think it will be this super top 25 prospect that we can all get in love with, but
no.
A couple of sort of top 100s, maybe low top 100s. But yeah, ultimately, this rebuild is going to be in its early days, in its infancy. It's going to be pretty rough.
Yeah.
And it's just a case of, unfortunately, surviving.
As a fan base.
As a fan base, yeah. But I think there's a little couple of bits to be excited about. And obviously, if there is a big trade of Luzardo or Garrett, then that could be not a big enthusiasm trading them, but the return would be something that are sort of like a pinnacle part of the return of the excitement going into the rebuild.
Yeah.
I hate to bring up his name again, but
almost
like what Brinson was or was supposed to be.
Oh, my days.
But ultimately, I think it's a case of this rebuild is going to be done through the draft. There's a couple of interesting guys like Mac, who I don't think we'll see this year. He's just too young, in my opinion, for them to start his clock.
Yeah, there's no point. Yeah.
But yeah, for me, if Conine comes up and can be a mini Duvall guy that's going to hit 220, going to strike out 35% of the time, but every now and then yaks out an absolute bomb. That's the only excitement we've got to look forward to, unfortunately.
Mate, we need. I mean, it's funny we've been talking about this over the weekend, but the people need Pete Pratt running in the garden, lying on the grass for other bombs, and we need a mini Duval. I'm with you, mate. Griffin Conine could absolutely be that for the Marlins this year. I think actually, I feel like. Get into August, September, like there's going to be an opportunity for Griffin Conine. There's going to be an opportunity for Victor Mesa Jr., I think, as well. Like these guys are going to get a little shot here and there. Just ahead of the deadline, Sean, I haven't actually asked you this in advance of this, so I may catch you off guard, but I always do that to you, so apologies. Who do you think, who is the most, what's going to be how am I phrasing this question? What's the player that gets moved that you're least expecting, but you could see something happening for the Marlins? I don't know if I phrased that very well, but I know, Tanner Scott, Josh Bell, like it's obvious, obviously, because they're linked to expiring deals, but who's the guy that no one's really talking about that you think could be moved maybe?
That's interesting because if he was having a good season, I would say Berger, simply because it'd be surprising because of the control.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the most overrated player in baseball according to a particular poll that happened today, could be Jazz.
Yeah.
Like, I know that, I'm not his. It's not that I'm not his biggest fan, but like, I'm not this big swag guy. I'm a numbers guy.
Yeah.
So when you look at a player who's just over 100 WRC plus for his career, I'm not that huge on him, but he plays, let's be frank, very good centre field defense. Puts up some interesting numbers with the power and the speed. The contact has improved over his career, but I would still be surprised to see that him traded. Because I think he'd need to be hot. I think you'd need to have him get really hot and have a team just go crazy because they're in it. But also, there's some control left.
Yeah.
And as Marlins fans, we need a reason to turn the game on, or turn up at the ballpark.
Yep.
As little as there are right now.
Jazz is one of those, right? He fits in that bucket, no doubt.
Yeah, the second game of next year could be criminally low.
Yeah. Let me just ask you. I just want to ask you specifically on Jazz. I just recorded a solo pod talking about that specific topic, so I won't really cover a lot of that ground. But what I think is really interesting here is you've got a guy that in advance of this season went onto a podcast and laid it out. I would describe in his own way, but he laid it out a lot of like the clubhouse mentality. I almost dropped my computer then. A lot of the clubhouse mentality would be that stuff should never be discussed in public. And I do wonder, considering this poll that comes out is linked, is players like talking about it, right? And I do wonder if other players, other teams would see this personality as the wrong type of personality. Like, to your point, a guy that has a career, 104, 105 WRC plus, but appears to have almost, MVP levels of off the field drama. Is the drama too much for a 104 WRC plus? I think is the thing. And I think that's what I think is really interesting here with this whole Jazz Chisholm situation, where flashes of what he flashes, control. I think there's some like clear kind of red flags that exist here with Jazz, like the injury stuff, but I think kind of off the field too, in terms of the clubhouse situation, maybe his maturity. Like, there's things that you could call out there. And so when all said and done, super smart organizations, I think, are going to look at all these things together. And I don't think the Marlins are actually going to get back what they would expect to get for Jazz. And so that's kind of where my head's at with him, is I think he's maybe with the organization a little bit longer than maybe I originally thought, because maybe teams aren't going to be willing to pay the price tag because of maybe some other concerns. So I don't know, could that be impacting things with Jazz? Like, there's no smoke without fire maybe. And like some of the things that he's done, it does feel a touch, there's not many other people that are speaking that way about like former teammates that are active players, I guess is the point I'm making here. And is that a red flag really for Jazz and the way he can, I guess, fit into a clubhouse culture?
Yeah, I think to a certain degree, baseball is still very conservative. It's still very do the right thing, vanilla. Don't show up your opponent, all that kind of stuff. That's still in the game. It's grown a little bit, and swag is allowed a little bit more. And it's all really silly, isn't it, when you think about it? But yeah, I mean, I had some concerns during that interview as far as talking about, I was asleep for a meeting, but I didn't know the meeting was happening. And I'm like, it all sounds bad, doesn't it? It sounds like, you're telling on yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
We don't know what the ins and outs of all that were, obviously, and I don't want to read too much into it. I think to a certain degree there are some divides in all clubhouses around race, to be quite frank. But again, I don't want to talk too much about that because I don't know what happens inside the Marlins clubhouse or any clubhouse. But there is certainly a degree of connection between Jazz and Tim Anderson when he came in. And Tim was echoing some of the things that Jazz was saying as far as I've seen that in the clubhouse.
Yeah.
And I think Tim Anderson probably at his peak was a very similar player to Jazz, actually. Power, speed.
Yeah.
Somehow Tim Anderson got contact despite having a very similar profile.
Yeah.
Jazz. I never quite worked out how that happened. It was a bit of an anomaly. But they are two very similar players, not just on the field, but also in their experiences in baseball. So that's certainly interesting because Tim Anderson certainly rubbed a few people up the wrong way.
Jose Ramirez was being the main candidate, I guess, for that.
But yeah, so it's interesting. I think sometimes the dynamics in a clubhouse can be tough on people. And I think Jazz definitely did rub up against that old school mentality, which typically in the early days of my fanship were white players, but it certainly seems like Latinos also have kind of brought that in. Obviously, Mickey and Aguilar at the Marlins. So yeah, I think to a certain degree, his bombastic sort of attitude or way of playing the game. I mean, you see it in the NBA a lot. The players that are mid-tier players thinking they're the best players in the world because you have to. I think you have to have that cockiness. You have to be so self-assured to say, when I'm on my game, no one can stop me.
Yeah.
Because you don't reach that level of competition without that. I think all players have that, but some do a better job of containing it. Look, Jazz is who he is. He's going to change. He's a fully formed person at this point. And, what he's done has worked. We can talk about him being a 104 WRC plus player or 2 WAR player per year.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic achievement for a player from the Bahamas or anywhere in the world. He is the top 1% of baseball players that ever played or tried to play baseball. Yeah. So I don't think we should diminish him for what he's achieved. But yeah, I do certainly think that some of that does affect his trade value. And let's not forget he's going into his second of 3 arbitration years. That money is now growing and growing and growing. And unless he grows with it, then we saw what happened with Rise.
Yeah, no doubt. I like your shout, though, by the way. I know we kind of segued into Jazz because it's topical at this point, but the Jake Burger one is definitely an interesting one. To your point, the profile, the contract situation would make it seem improbable that the Marlins would move him. But I think he absolutely fits the profile of movable guy that you don't expect to be moved, but could be moved. And I think that's exactly who I was trying to. Well, I wasn't thinking specifically about Jake Burger, but I'm completely with you, mate. He's that profile, isn't he? I'd kind of put Braxton Garrett in the same profile as that, really, as well, in some ways, where pre-arb guy doing well, and you think, actually, let's move now. Like those guys, it's the pre-arb ones I think would be the most surprising, but we'll wait and see. We've run very long on this episode, so we're going to call it a day there. I appreciate everyone making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day, guys, and joining me and the UK GOAT, Sean Barrett. It's glad to be back as well, Sean. It's been long overdue. It's been great to share our experiences of the London Series as well, and it was great to actually see each other at the London Series and enjoy multiple beverages. I lost count, but it was multiple. So that was a lot of fun, no doubt. The one story I didn't get into, which I'll just kind of round it up here. This kind of summed up my day on Saturday. It was a lot of fun. Great seeing everyone. However, I went to buy another beverage at 1-1 in the game, and I came back, and it was 6-1. I was like, what the hell's happened? I said to Tara, Mrs. Pratt, Tara, what happened? I don't know. She said, I have no idea. I asked Sean what happened. I'm not sure Sean knew either. So it was that kind of day for sure. 3-run blast, I think, from Whit Merrifield was the main talking point there. Bryce Harper, though, by the way, absolutely demolished one, and so did Nick Castellanos in that game. So there were some big boom shots from the boys. And I've taken away that soundbite you had there, Sean, of Jazz and his, I want to say, boombastic. Is that the description you had of Jazz? I think that's almost a perfect summary of him as well. Right, let's finish it up there. London Series was fun. 25 won't be happening. 26 will be. Who will be involved? We don't know. I'm interested to see what Major League Baseball does in terms of their commitment to this market moving forwards. I do think there's a role that the Marlins can play because, and maybe follow a similar path to the Jacksonville Jaguars, where the Marlins commit to London every year for the next 10, and they come back every year as part of a multi-series effort from Major League Baseball with London. I think it's a model that's worked in London. It's a model that's worked for the NFL. It's a really healthy game now, and the following has grown year on year. It's what baseball's looking to. And if it ain't broke, you know what I mean? So I can absolutely see the Marlins playing a role in that. Thanks to the UK GOAT, of course, for joining me. Hopefully he's back before the deadline. You know the UK GOAT will be around if there's any emergency podcast requirements as well. I can see trades happening at any moment, to be honest with you. So we're always ready to rock and roll. Appreciate everyone for hopping onto this one. I look forward to seeing you soon.